Hello again, and welcome back to the 6.5 Summit. I'm Shelley Kramer, one of the founding partners of Futurum Research, and on behalf of all of us at Futurum and Moor Insights, we're really glad to have you here. In this keynote session, we have a treat for you. Jason Mann, the Vice President of IoT for SAS, is joined by Joe Jensen, the Vice President IoT Group and General Manager for Retail, Banking, Hospitality, and Education at Intel, and Todd Gurela, the CTO of Industries Solutions at Cisco, all joined forces to come together and talk with us about the transformation of retail and how long-term planning and investment in technology is really critical to a retail brand success. I really can't think of any topic more relevant for anyone in the retail industry than this one right now. Without further ado, let's see what these guys have to say.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session focused on the customer experience in a rapidly transforming retail industry. Thank you for joining, and thank you to both Joe and Todd for bringing your perspectives to the conversation. So have a short time ahead of us, so let's jump right in. So if we look at the retail industry, perhaps more than any other, it's experiencing fundamental changes. Retailers are forced to respond to the digital transformation that's happening globally. So significant change around the world. Certainly everyone's familiar with the competitive pressure presented by the giant e-commerce sites like Amazon and Alibaba. Many aren't as familiar with the other door that gets opening by the digital experience by the hundreds of smaller competitors that can essentially enter the space with very little investment and very little time to market. If you have an innovative product, you can be there in a short amount of time. We're also seeing a competitive pressure that's coming from the brands themselves. The brands have started bypassing the retailers and finding a path directly to the end customer, which also puts you in a position of what had historically been a partner, now becoming a competitor in the space as well. We see the bulk of spend is still primarily in the brick and mortar stores, but by all forecasts and intent, the future is the digital channel, either directly through spend, and if not, through influence, how things are bought within brick and mortar. So you have all of these challenges that are ahead of us, and then all of a sudden the entry of a global pandemic. So now everything is passed through this filter that fundamentally changes how retailers now engage both with their end customer and perhaps equally as important with their supply chains fulfillment, as many are distributed globally. So Joe, let me pitch it over to you first. As we look at all of these challenges that are out there today, what does a successful retailer in this environment look like? Who is going to thrive with all the challenges that we see in front of us today?
Well, our point of view has been that retail is under huge disruption, obviously, and that's really not been driven by online competitors. It's really been driven by consumers and their insatiable appetite for better and better experiences. So consumers are really expecting more and different things all the time, and the retailers who are better able to listen to their customer and anticipate how they want to interact and how they want to engage, those are the retailers who are winning. Up until now, the big online players have been better frankly, at meeting those new expectations. We're seeing, though, a lot of promise in some of the bigger retailers who've made foundational investments in technology and who are really dialed into that. Click and collect, a great example. The retailers who had click and collect capability in place and the wrinkles worked out of it at the start of the pandemic did quite well, actually, through the pandemic. Those with no click and collect, whose stores were closed and didn't have a great online presence, essentially zeroed out. So it really is more how well can you listen to the customer and understand how they want to engage.
Right, and it seems like adaptability is a big factor here. So pandemic driving a lot of curbside pickup, for example, and having to transform your business to support a whole new delivery mechanism. Are you seeing that's impacting the retailers as well?
Yeah, the way we like to look at it is we think that consumers are really driven by two forces. One, they want hyper convenient, which really means no friction. How do I take any point of friction or frustration out of my experience? Click and collect's a great example. Pandemic, I'm worried it's not safe. Maybe I can't go in the store. How can I really easily get what I need from the retailer? The easier it is, the more likely that retailer is to succeed. The other end of the spectrum is really hyper experience. I have one of my engineers in China was explaining how they live there, and basically everything's in his apartment or in the office. And he said, if I bother to put pants on, it better be worth it. And I think that's kind of the way people look at it today. If I'm going to bother to get up and go out, especially in the face of the pandemic, they better have in stock what I want. It better be an easy experience, or it better be an amazing experience. Otherwise, they're just going to go online or go click and collect.
Right. All right. So Todd, what do you think? What's your perspective on this?
Well, it certainly goes beyond just click and collect as well. When you look at the flexible fulfillment that customers are looking for, the omni-channel experience, started absolutely with the larger digital players and expanding into the brick and mortar stores. But what we're seeing now, it's not just the big players that can participate in that. Flexible fulfillment, curbside pickup, things like that, were something that all players had to be involved in if they wanted to remain open in any way. I'm fortunate. My wife owns a small wine shop, and we learned really quickly through this pandemic what it takes for a small business to really open up an online presence and enable that flexible fulfillment for the customers. And we just went through the largest mass scale POC ever worldwide, and what we've seen out of this is that absolute flexibility that exists because of technology today.
So, when we engage at Intel with retailers and trying to help them see how analytics and technology can help, meet these new expectations, one of the common answers we get is, well, we tried that before. It was really expensive. It was really difficult. And I think one of the key questions people have is why now? Or, can I do it now? Todd, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the why now is really coming down to the ease of technology and really the ability for retailers, large and small, to access the technology they need and in a flexible consumption way. No longer do they need to, go through a massive integration and installation to be able to take advantage of many of the technologies that are being utilized for click and collect or flexible fulfillment or even location services when they're inside the brick and mortar stores. So I think we're seeing that technologies have advanced in a simplified, executable format, and then the way that we're seeing the retailers consume it is, expanding beyond the let's just try a single store, let's just try that science project and see what happens. We're truly seeing companies looking at what is ready for more of a scale build out.
Yeah, at any time I think about this, the question of why now, I go back to the Gartner hype cycle. I think everyone has encountered a version of that. So the transition from that, unrealistic expectations to the trough of disillusionment. I'm sure I have the terms wrong, but then you start seeing a return. And I've always looked at that as the trough of disillusionment isn't a bad place to be if you're going to be first to market. As you start to transition up the slope for generating a return. And I think this has been a great example of companies that had started up that trough. They had been through the trials and tribulations, right, of enacting these technologies and this digital transformation. And when something like a global pandemic pops up, they were ready to respond and proactively address these new market realities.
And I'd just add one comment to that. I think as they've gone through those trials and really maybe tried different pieces of technology, what we also see is they now understand how those technologies have to work together, and that brings the outcomes that they're looking for, the outcomes the customers are looking for. So looking at it more holistically, but still understanding what are the piece parts that need to come together. So to build on what we were just speaking about, retailers have been experimenting with the technologies for many years. We've seen those projects have multiple solution providers involved, looking at different pieces of the business. All of those different pieces have really grown and matured. What we're seeing now is the outcomes have become more real, and that's leading retailers to really drive for more of that. They want those positive results. So, just a question to put out there is, what's the proven value in the use of partnerships and the existence of ecosystems in this space?
Well, at Intel, we're a huge believer in bringing the ecosystem together. We think that it's difficult for any one player to create a solution, and even if you did, it's unlikely that that solution you create would connect with all the other bits and pieces that the retailer's using in their back end. And so it's critical that we work together as a set of co-travelers to build a solution or set of solutions that can interoperate with bits and pieces. And I think that's a key to really getting scale. As we've done these, this trough of disillusionment phase, those tend to be a point solution where somebody's tried to do the whole bit themselves. And it's really difficult to scale. You might be able to solve one or two customers' unique environments, but you can't scale that everywhere. And so it's really critical. And I think one of the things that we've done really well in IT in general is we work together as a set of co-travelers to tend to build these solutions and meet the various needs that our customers have.
Yeah, Joe, I like the term co-travelers. So it's first time that I've heard that, because it really is a journey that requires multiple people to get aligned to this end destination. Todd, you mentioned they've been working on these things for 3 to 5 years and working through these technologies, and we saw a lot of that, right? If you think about some of the initial objectives or initial projects around IoT, they were the proof of concept. I'll call it, some smart people in a room with a bit of data, trying to find some insight from the data. And while that insight could be achieved, very rarely does that model transition into an operations environment, right? Something that's sustaining and returning value over time. So it really takes that broader ecosystem. There's been a tremendous amount of work. If you think about the technology and the infrastructure that's required from the compute capability at the edge, right? That was one of the first hurdles. Extreme advances in computer vision is another area that I think has provided a lot of advancement. So a lot of the technological hurdles have been cleared, and now it really moves into that ecosystem that's focused on the outcomes. So as I look at some of the use cases that we have with some of our customers, where today what 5 years ago seemed like an unachievable objective, now based on your omni-channel view of your customer, you can link that back to some proximity awareness that your customer has now just walked into your brick and mortar store, and you can really get hyper focused on a promotion to them based on that they've come in the store, or even where they may be within the store. So that takes an ecosystem, right? There's that network. There's all the way down to the chipset and communications protocols, the cameras themselves, deployment into the infrastructure. So all these things have to be combined to make it achievable. And I'm happy to say, for many of these forward-looking use cases, the ecosystems are formed, and all that really is left to do is to get started in the space. Yeah. So I don't know if either one of you had other points around that, but it's an exciting time for us.
Yeah, the multimodal capability, when you look at what's come into this, many of these things start with specific use cases or specific outcomes the customers are looking for. So the ecosystem that they've installed is for a specific purpose. But you look at what we've just gone through with the pandemic and the need for contact tracing now, the need for social density awareness and social density monitoring, so that you can put into place, the proper directional information for the associates. What do they have to do differently? Maybe they have to, have somebody at the edge of the store that says, we can't let any more customers in at this moment. You can do it, with a click counter, or you can actually have the tools and the technology that enables that. And honestly, the gap isn't very big for them to have that through a technological deployment based on what they're doing with wireless and other sensors already.
And, Todd, on that point, I've been kind of amazed at how quickly our ecosystem have come up with technical solutions to those problems. Retail CEOs are very focused on keeping their staff safe and keeping their environment safe for customers. We've had customers in weeks come up with algorithms to detect whether you're wearing a mask and if it's on correctly. At the same time, quick thermal scan, and then also do counting in the store to control traffic and flow. And being able to automate those in a kiosk is much less threatening for a customer, and it alleviates the staff need to be confrontational with customers.
Absolutely, and as we move through this maturity process, oftentimes you don't have visibility of the benefits that will present themselves in the future. I think it was a great example, Todd, that the communications infrastructure that was set up for perhaps the original intent of promotion now turns to be able to enable the retailers to communicate to customers about what to expect when they get to the store, what procedures are going to be in place with respect to social distancing or other impacts of the COVID filter that we mentioned earlier. So additional benefits to come, even those that we might not anticipate now. So with that, I know we had a short time today. We heard some themes around omni-channel, adaptability, the fact that retail is not dead and dying, but certainly huge hurdles that many of the early movers are tackling and actually benefiting from the scenarios that are presented to them. So I'd like to thank you both for your input. And I would ask anyone that's joining the call, if you have further interest, all of our contact information will be provided in the closing documentation, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.